My name is Lillian Day Thorpe, and I am the director of Nancy Margolis Gallery. I'm really excited to have guest artist and curator Hilary Irons with us, who is going to converse with Jarid about the paintings in his current solo exhibition, 5/8 Moon. When they're done, I'll open it up to questions or comments from the audience. Feel free to type a question into the chat box at any point, and I'll read it aloud at the end, or you can click on the raise hand icon and I will call on you. Before getting started, I just want to say a few words about Jarid and Hilary for those of you who don't know them yet. Jarid del Deo is a Maine artist whose studio is located in Biddeford. After graduating with his BFA in painting and printmaking from the University of New Hampshire, he spent over a decade working in the performing arts in the Pacific Northwest and Europe. In 2012, he settled in Maine and turned his focus back to painting. Del Deo exhibits regularly on both coasts and has work in private collections throughout the United States and Canada. In 2022, Del Deo was named one of 10 emerging artists to watch by Art New England. Also based in Maine, our moderator, Hilary Irons, is a painter and curator. She is gallery and exhibitions director at the University of New England and is represented by Dowling Walsh Gallery. Irons received an MFA from the Yale School of Art in 2008 and a BFA from Parsons School of Design in 2002. She has attended residencies at the Albers Foundation, Skowhegan, MacDowell, the American Academy in Rome, the Pace House, Hewn Oaks, the Canterbury Shaker Village, and finally Surf Point Foundation. Before handing it over to Jarid and Hilary, I'm going to give a little overview of each of the 9 paintings featured in 5/8 Moon to give a visual recap of the show. We'll have a chance to look at them more closely during the talk, but I want to start by just sharing my screen for a minute. 5/8 Moon. Red line on Skeleton Pond. Curtain with pink dot. Breakwater. Evening window. Jenny in Mountain Ash. Nature sees you. Spruce Creek red bandana. And finally, 3 chimneys. Okay, Hilary, I would love to pass it on to you and you can begin chatting with Jarid.
So I'm Hilary Irons. Thank you so much, Lillian, for that wonderful introduction. I really admire what you do at Nancy Margolis, just in terms of presenting work in this sort of, really beautiful, sensitive, and thoughtful way without recourse to a physical location. It's fantastic. And I think Jarid's work is such a wonderful sort of starting place for that, just because it is so communicative and, it really allows us to see into these spaces that are so kind of multifaceted, but also, inhabiting a kind of simplicity of approach that is, it kind of hides the complexity. All right, so Jarid, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So, I really value your compositional strategies in your work, the way that you are so careful about the edges of the picture plane, the way that you use cropping, the way that you center and decenter various elements of the piece. I just think that you have this great kind of sense of relationship between place and non-place, image and non-image. How would you talk about your relationship to image and non-image in your work, or abstraction and content? Like, what do you see there? Just
good question. Well, I think think I use because the imagery in my paintings is like pretty static generally. I think I use like shape and compression to sort of like try to propel the image to, you know, to show some movement, either spatial movement or time, you know, chronological movement. Is that, yeah, I think that's what you're asking,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like the formulation of space and compression. That makes a lot of sense. When you're planning your paintings, can you just talk a little bit about your materials, your technique, and your kind of like your process?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I when I'm coming up with an idea for an image, it's basically like I'll have like a vague, I'll see something, you know, in passing in my local environment or whatever, and get sort of like a seed for an idea, and I start laying it out on the panel or canvas, usually panel, and as that develops, different ideas sort of like get interjected into it. So I keep a painting like really loose for days, really, very like kind of washy. And if paint does start to build up, I'll scrape it off, and just kind of keep the painting able to be nimble and flexible for as long as possible, until I get like things nailed down to a point where I feel like the composition is starting to do something, you know, mean something. And then at that point, you know, at that point, I start building up paint.
Yeah, that's great. So that kind of reminds me of, I think we've talked about this before, but the Art 21 film from a number of years ago that Rex Drawdowns made is so great. He talks about starting all of his work thinking about what he calls the literary content. And as soon as he's got the painting underway, he scraps all of his interest in the subject matter and moves into the abstract content of the work. So I like how what you're saying kind of refers back to that paradigm. And you use oil paint.
Right. Yeah.
What medium do you use to keep it loose and washy at first?
I mean, at first it's like I just use a lot of solvent, Gamsol is what I use,
Yeah.
but as the painting progresses, then I start using this 3-part medium that you actually gave me the recipe for. Is
Right.
that what you're drinking right now?
Okay. So
It's Venice turpentine and what else is in it? Linseed oil, Venice turpentine, and I forget what the third thing is.
varnish.
Right, Damar varnish. Yeah. So yeah, I started using that about, I don't know, a year ago, I guess you told me about that magical solution, and works good. Thank you for that hot tip.
Yeah, anytime. And before you popped back in, we were just talking about how important it is for painters to have, you know, someone they feel like they can trust to bounce ideas off of. And yeah, to me, you're that person. And I'm glad to know that my 3-part medium has been at least a partial payback for all the help you've given. So in terms of the way that you structure your paintings and you think about composition, one of the things that I love so much about your work is the way that you focus on the idea of the nocturne. So there are these nighttime scenes that are, you know, they're richly dark, but they're still illuminated by these jewel-like colors that you gravitate toward. So paintings like 5/8 Moon, which we saw earlier, when Lillian went through your slides, Red Line on Skeleton Pond, I absolutely love this piece that has the scene of, you know, the darkness really illuminated by the smallest little hint of light that really kind of fills the space with these weird undulating warm and cold colors. So they all show this kind of beautiful sort of fading liminal atmosphere where things have the potential to change and shift. Other examples would be breakwater, evening window, curtain with a pink dot. All of these pieces are kind of working through this idea. Why are you interested in this? What draws you toward these nocturnes as opposed to more diurnal landscapes?
Does diurnal mean daytime?
It sure does.
Okay. Um, well, what I like about the nighttime paintings, or one of the things I like about the nighttime paintings is because you can't see anything or everything, you can't see everything. Your mind kind of like fills in those blank areas, and I think sometimes like your imagination. In general, I need to look at something to like draw it or paint it. I can't just like make things up. I'm not good at that. But if you have like a basic structure, which you have in a nighttime scene because you have some kind of lighting, moonlight or headlights of a car or something. So you have like a framework to work within, but you can fill in details, or I can fill in details from my imagination as long as I have that framework. So it works good for me. In that sense, I can invent things, but I have parameters, I guess.
Yeah.
Another thing that I like about, and this is more kind of in like a sunrise or sunset. Well, in my case, sunset time of day. I don't wake up early enough to paint sunrises, but in the evening, I feel like certain colors get brighter when the light is coming from a horizontal direction. In the middle of the day, there's sort of like a diffuseness to light because it's just all over and bouncing everywhere. And but in the evening, like some colors sort of like lose their luminosity, and some colors get brighter at that time of day, and that's easy for me to work with. It's easy to like arrange a palette around that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I love what you're talking about in terms of allowing the imagination to fill in, because I feel like that's what we do outside in the nighttime anyway, just as creatures. Like we hear a sound, we think it must be like a massive animal, even if it's a squirrel or a bunny, right? And I think like, that sort of sense of projection, imaginative projection into the unknown is something that really permeates all of your these sort of like undercurrents of narrative in your landscapes. That's awesome. Thank you. And then another device that I see emerging in a lot of your work that I really love is a sense of like an aperture opening up, sort of a window, a proscenium, a way to look into something through something else. And conversely, a lot of your works also feature a kind of denial of entry or kind of an elevated horizon line. So the aperture-based works, they almost remind me of set design, like Natalia Goncharova's set designs for the Ballet Russe from the 1930s. This beautiful kind of, way of looking into a space through another space. And then these high popped up horizons. Right now we're seeing a great example of that, which is the Spruce Creek Red Bandana painting of yours. It remind me almost of the sort of so-called world landscapes that were made by Northern Renaissance artists like Joachim Patinier, where the horizon line is so high that you feel like you're kind of sailing over the scene. So there's a sort of disembodied sensation that comes from having these kind of shifts in horizon or shifts in entry point in your work. Can you talk a little bit about these openings and closures of Viewpoint and how they kind of inform the way that you're using space?
Yeah, sure. Well, I like to think of a painting as an object, but it's also a plane, it's also a window, or a portal. So I like playing with that idea. I also like with a book or a song even, a story's being told in a period of time. So like you have to turn the page to like get the next piece of the story or something. But with a painting, it's sort of just, it's all in front of you at once. And I think by having like a clear definition between foreground, middle ground, and background with these devices like curtains or something like that, you sort of like slow the read time down, and you can kind of like move through the painting in stages. So those are like the two things I guess I'm thinking about when I'm doing that. In terms of like this one right here in front of us, the red bandana, which, you use the term like, I think you said it sort of denies us a full view or something like that. That's a little bit different than, I guess, an aperture, but I do like the sense that you've got this thing right up against the front of the picture plane, and you can kind of see around it on the sides or the top. And I've used that idea a few times in different paintings, and I like the sense that you're looking at two things at once, as the object in the foreground, and then it doesn't exist on its own. There's like this world behind it. Yeah.
Really interesting how you make those. You kind of like make it so that what we're being presented with is something that's contiguous, so we can see them as existing in the same place. They don't. It's fascinating to me that for all your sense of play and experimentation with the way that content and form interact here, there's never like a sense of unreality or surrealism in the work. All of the kind of surprising juxtapositions just come from things that would naturally exist in there together in the environment anyway. And like when I think about something like this piece, like I really think about how kind of the whole project of American abstraction starting in the 1950s was to have a painting. You're making this really interesting comparison between the painting as a window and a portal and the painting as a planar object. Like, I feel like those two impulses have historically been really shoved apart. Like these sort of New York school abstractionists were, completely dedicated to the idea of flattening the plane, like the view extending outward rather than inward, and really kind of contrasting that to any earlier form of painting, including earlier modernism that, saw the painting as more of a recessive space or window. But yeah, I love how you can like zip in and out of the edges, but you can also immerse yourself in the flatness of this bandana pattern, which itself is, very sensitively transcribed in all of its imperfection. I love that. And one of the painters it makes me think of when I'm thinking about other artists in relationship to you is Catherine Murphy, and the way that she uses these kind of interesting juxtapositions of form and flatness and like kind of richness and of richness at the same time. And some other artists that I think of when I see your work would be Lois Dodd, of course. Fairfield Porter. These seem to be people that you're working in their studio with them, right? Like the same sort of questions are being posed, and it seems like you're in historical conversation with them. But I also think of artists like maybe that flare off a little bit more from your intentions, like Paul Nash. Comes to mind his work, like this painting of the dogfight in the sky.
Oh yeah.
I love that piece. Bob Thompson, with the sort of clarity of his shapes and the way that the flat plane of the picture is popped right up with the way that he uses color and cropping. Georgia O'Keeffe, of course, she's has a fascinating way of talking about space and flatness at the same time with this kind of like visionary use of like, fairly literal transcription of objects and places. And then also, German artists who are associated with new objectivity, like Christian Schad, for example. Like I love the way that surface and detail are kind of coming together to kind of make something very familiar into something surprising. So, and earlier I had talked about Natalia Goncharova's set design,
Right.
which, it's like just so beautiful, and it kind of posits like this sort of endless screens of visual information that you can move through, or Joachim Patinier's sort of world landscapes that he was, really made something that people hadn't seen before, and it presented something kind of like cinematically productive to his audience. But these are just like so many different things that I associate with your sense of play and your paintings. Who do you see yourself in conversation with historically?
That's another good question, Hilary. Well, I mean, Lois Dodd and Fairfield Porter certainly. If not because of the way they lay paint down, then definitely because of their sort of Northeast United States subject matter, which I do feel a connection to this sort of like regional type of painting, New England landscape painting. And I think like, I think you and I and our friend Tessa Green O'Brien, and a lot of the people sort of associated with the old Abel Baker gallery, like I feel like we have a similar sort of interest in like the New England landscape, so that's kind of how I feel like I fit in. Like I like being part of these people that find new ways to paint what we see every day, but there's obviously enough fascination in it that we keep just, hopefully keep discovering new ways to see it, new ways to paint it.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're saying is amazing to me, because you're kind of talking about yourself as part of this lineage of people that you are also really closely associated with. And I find the directness of that kind of conversational process of inspiration to be really gratifying and interesting to me, just as someone who's also part of the, same kind of like regional atmosphere that you're part of. I love how you're thinking about it. And, I have a question that's kind of related to this, where you're speaking about things that you see in your environment, and kind of like pulling in these different inspirations is maybe one way of thinking about it, but kind of more like bits of data and kind of bits of information that are informing you. Do you photograph things in your environment? Do you bring a camera around? How do you generate the images in your work? Do you have a sketchbook? What do you do?
I don't carry a camera, but I do carry my camera phone.
My phone, yeah, I have to.
It's a phone and a camera. I take a lot of pictures with my phone, and I do take a lot of sort of, I wouldn't say I carry a sketchbook, but I take these sort of like visual notes where I don't spend a lot of time trying to capture what's in front of me. It's more like I just enough to like remember an idea. So it could be like just a couple of lines that doesn't even look like anything, but when I get back to the studio, it'll remind me that, you know, a certain thing was twice as far away as this other thing, you know. So it's very like crude and minimal in that sense. But I do take a lot of photos as like source material. I don't paint plein air. I mean, I have, but I'm not good at it. I don't like to be out in the elements trying to paint and you know, dealing with wind and mosquitoes or sun or rain or what, you know, it's just not my thing. But I do spend a lot of time out in front of the things that I eventually paint, just sort of absorbing their essence and just like, you know, getting to know a place well enough so that the information that's missing from my notes or the photograph is still, you know, in my mind somewhere, or in there enough that I can, you know, fill in the blanks with something that's believable.
Yeah, totally. That's really interesting to me to think about you as this sort of studio painter who has this like habit of, it's almost like developing the habit of mind of memorization, and just sort of like allowing the moment to sort of saturate your memory banks. I feel like I get there through drawing, and you seem to get there through kind of maybe a little bit more of a sensitive and direct approach that's less about transcription.
Yeah, I mean, this might be like an obvious thing to say, and maybe every painter feels this way, but I'm really aware of what I'm trying to do is not like document my surroundings in a visual way, even though painting is a visual medium. But I'm trying to like convey, you know, the emotion that I'm feeling when I'm confronted with whatever I'm painting, you know. So feeling has more to do, it has more to do with feeling than a direct sort of transcription of what's in front of, you know, what's in front of me or what I'm painting, if that makes sense. I
Totally.
mean,
Yeah,
that seems like super obvious to me. I don't know.
it's not super obvious to me
Okay.
because I get like an emotive reading from the work, but I don't know if it's just something I'm bringing into it, because I feel like I can get there with like a Kazimir Malevich painting too. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's actually amazing to hear you say that, because I guess for me, I kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a failing in my work. I think that I try to eliminate something that would be more overtly emotive. So it's cool for me to hear you talking about like kind of leaning into that a little bit and allowing it to really inform your process. I love that. Another nice piece of Del Deo homework for me when I get back to my studio. But, you know, I think, you know, another thing that I respect so much about your practice, like something I see totally interwoven into your practice, like I've worked with you in so many different ways, sort of like as fellow artists, as a, you know, a fan girl before I met you, and curatorially, we worked together at Abel Baker, the artist run space, where we both contributed a lot of time and energy. And also here at the University of New England, we worked together installing the exhibits. You know, I sort of vaguely gesture around, and then you find the actually good places to install things, after which point you hang them up. So I feel like our creative relationship is so active and built on so many things. But one thing that you always do that I admire so much, and it seems so unusual, is you chase down the things that you love to look at in person. Like you drove down to the Milton Avery show. You went to the New Bedford Whaling Museum to see the Albert Pinkham Ryder show. You saw the Lois Dodd exhibit and Arthur Dove. And, you know, the way that you find these paintings where they are in the world as, you know, like living personae that embody the intentions of the artists, I think that's amazing. Do you see that as a part of your creative practice? Or if not, like, how does it inform what you do?
Yeah, I think it's part of my creative process. I mean, I really enjoy seeing paintings in person, because I'm interested in not just the image, but I like to see how people apply paint and how thick the paint is, whether it's shiny or flat. I like to look at the edges of the canvas. Did they does the artist paint around the edges of the substrate, or is it just raw canvas? Or I mean, all those things are like interesting to me, and they're like clues into how other people build paintings. And especially with painters that I really love, like Milton Avery or Lois Dodd. I want to see if maybe I'll see maybe I'll see something in that, in how they make a painting that I can use in my own paintings.
Yeah, totally. Have you had any surprises looking at something in person?
Yeah. I remember going to see that Matisse cutouts show at the MoMA, like maybe like 5 years ago or 7 years ago. I don't know when it was. Anyway, I remember seeing those works in books like my whole life, and being like, yeah, they're cool shapes, and they're interesting compositions and pretty cool shapes, but they always seem sort of like flat, and like they sort of lacked the imprint of the artist, but seeing them in person, you see like there's like fingerprints and like pinholes and like pieces of tape, and like spilled coffee. I don't know, there's just like all this like other stuff that really like made that work become more human to me and not graphic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that idea of the materiality of the piece kind of transcending the design properties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I see so much in your work too. When I see them in person, like just your handwriting, the calligraphy of the mark, it's so beautiful. So I think after this, we're going to have one more. I have one more tiny question, and then we'll have a question and answer. So
Sure.
if anyone in the audience would like to put those in the chat, Lillian will.
That's perfect. And then I can start reading them at the end, but yeah, go ahead, Hilary, for your question.
So my last question is just very small, which is, do you know what's next in your studio? Because you've had this like really compelling trajectory, and do you have any ideas for like what your next piece might look like? Just for us insiders who are here at your talk.
Oh man, I wish I did. I mean, I sort of do, but yeah, I'm going to well, I really don't know specifically what I'm going to do, but I'm excited to just kind of paint without I don't have any other shows in the near future coming up, so I have this sort of freedom to just like experiment. I just started taking a ceramics class, so I'm going to see like what happens there. And I have this, like, if I can just like say this like little thing like really quick. I know there's people that want to ask some questions, but one thing that I'm like sort of experimenting with right now is just kind of letting the paintbrush kind of lead me along through a painting, and not really like thinking too much about the painting as a whole or what the image will be. And I'm trying to sort of like train my brain to think that way. I just started swimming this year at the YMCA, and when I like take my glasses off, I can't see anything or anybody, and so I just like follow the black tile line on the bottom of the pool, and then there's like a break in the line, and that tells you have like one more stroke left before the wall. And like, so like really like trusting that line is like kind of giving myself over to like this thing that I'm not used to just trusting, and I want to like be able to do that with painting, you know, if that makes any sense. Hope that's not too obtuse, but
No,
I
that's
love that.
that's the dream. Totally.
yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me and answer my questions
Yeah.
today.
Hilary, those were great questions, and it was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Hilary. We do have some questions coming in, and I'd love to read some of those out loud. This one was emailed to me a few days ago in advance of the talk, so I'd love to squeeze that one in. She asks, Jared, are you drawn to the landscapes you paint because they are constantly different due to natural events such as day and night, and also events that change the landscapes due to human activity?
Yeah. I mean, I think I like touched on this earlier with like changing light. That's like a big factor in what I decide to paint. In terms of like human activity, yeah, I think I've like, as subject matter, I've used a few times. I've used images of something happening, like a forest in the process of being cut down, or a fence being built, or something like that. So I do like those sort of in between stages. Yeah.
I love the in-between stages also, and what you choose to keep obscure versus revealed. It creates such an engaging balance as the viewer. This is a comment from Jessica. She says, this is when we were looking at the bandana painting. The worn qualities of the bandana also affect the pace at which we appreciate the entire work. It speaks to time passing, which is implied in so many of your pieces. I love that comment, and I really liked it when you talked about how your paintings sort of determine a speed at which viewers digest them or come to sort of engage with the whole work. And I totally see that in your paintings. It's such an interesting technique.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica, for that comment. That's
Deborah asks, do you wander around at night, or are the night scenes from your imagination?
I do wander around at night. I live sort of out in the country, so even like just walking down to the end of our dirt road to get the mail in the dark is an experience, and something that's informs my paintings. That's one of those times where I'm like sort of absorbing the things around me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Kate asks, did you have a great teacher? Which is a good question. In art school, did you have a teacher that stood out to you as being especially influential or inspiring?
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a lot of really influential teachers and mentors. I had a teacher named Tim Harney that I'm still good friends with. And I took more classes with him than anyone else, and he had a very big influence on me. I mean, he's yeah. He's a great painter. He's still painting. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. This one is from one of our gallery artists, Gail Spain. She said,
Gail.
Jared, congratulations. I so love this show, and the context that Hilary brings to the conversation is really terrific. Here is a question. Passages that might look like mistakes often show humanity and emotion and vulnerability in painting, all things I see in your work. I had to leave, but I wanted to ask anyway. What role do mistakes play in your work?
Oh, yeah, mistakes play a huge role. I think I alluded to this earlier, like I sort of like keep painting in a state of flux for a long time. And part of that is to give me an opportunity to make some mistakes and have some accidents that, turn into, a lot of times they'll turn into the best part of the painting. I'll be trying to do one thing and something else will happen. And then I'll gravitate towards that thing because it's more interesting to me than what I originally set out to do. Part of the process of painting is like not just it's not a self-congratulatory process where I set out to do something and then I accomplish that thing and then I'm like, oh, I did what I wanted to do. It's more like these things happen and I have to contend with these unforeseen mistakes and stuff. And a lot of times they're better than what I would have come up with on my own. And then but recognizing that it is, a good thing, and like following that is part of what I really like about painting.
Mhm.
Like this, it's not me making the decision, but I think my role is more recognizing when recognizing that thing that happens on its own and then following it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Um, Fellow artist Tessa O'Brien says, I love your work and I'm honored to be in conversation. Technical question. What are your top 3 go-to colors?
Oh man, wow. Well, definitely raw umber. I use raw umber and I use phthalo blue a lot, and that's my primary. That's the dark that I use a lot, and then I adjust the warmth or the coolness depending on more blue, the more the phthalo blue or more of the umber. Yeah, I mean those 2 are the ones that I couldn't live without. I'm sort of in an experimental phase with colors right now because I've been trying out some tubes of colors that I don't normally use and trying to integrate them into my palette. So that's exciting.
We have another technical question here from Julia. Can you talk more about the 3-part medium? 3 equal parts? What makes it so magical?
Oh yeah, it's 3 equal parts. The Venice turpentine, linseed oil, and Damar varnish. So I have like a little spoon that I keep in the studio, and it's just like a teaspoon of each. I try to mix it up a fresh batch every painting session because it gets kind of mucky and stuff after a while. But it's what makes it magical. Well, it's got a really nice flow. It keeps the paint looking sort of wet, especially with some of the colors that dry quicker. I would say it extends the open time a little bit. But more importantly, it like keeps things sort of oiled in. So like if I come back the next day, some colors will be matte, some colors will still be oily, and the medium keeps everything with sort of the oily look.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself working on multiple paintings at once, or do you just focus on one composition at a time, bring it to completion, and then move on? Or do you have a lot of works in progress happening simultaneously?
I don't have a lot of work going at the same time, but I might have 2, maybe 3 paintings. But generally I'm like the other ones I'll be kind of working on, but I'll be focusing on I'll be focusing on one of them. The other 2, 1 or 2 will be there if I just need a break from the painting I'm focusing on. But yeah, I really sort of like get absorbed into the one that's in front of me, and I need to sort of stay in that world as much as possible without hopping around.
Certainly. Sort of branching off that, Catherine asks a pertinent question, which is, do you work on the same paintings over months or years? If yes, when do you decide it's finished now?
That's a good question. It does. I am a pretty slow painter. I wouldn't say years, with the exception of every once in a while I'll go back into a painting, maybe a year or 2 later, if I decide, I think I would like to change this area. I think I have a better solution. But generally, a painting takes me on average a month, I would say. Yeah.
Got it. Emily asks, do you see the work as more about everyday observation or about place? Despite being New England, there's a universal feel or essence.
Yeah, do I see it about, can you rephrase that first, or can you just re-say that first part of the
Yes.
question?
Do you see the work as more about everyday observation or about place? Despite
Right.
being New England, there's a universal feel or essence.
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I see it more about everyday observation, but it also is very much about place. Yeah, it's both of those things. I think because I live here, it's about this place. I think if I lived in another part of the world, I would paint those surroundings, you know. So yeah, I guess in that sense, yeah, it's about everyday observation, because that's what's important to me, is like what I'm seeing around me.
Mhm.
That's what feels honest to me, is like painting what I know.
Yes.
Can I
Hillary,
just
yes.
interject and say that one of your most beautiful paintings in this exhibit, 5/8 Moon, was, I think, the painting 5/8 Moon that you painted in Puerto Rico. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. That's the one hole in my story, because I don't usually paint, you know, in exotic locations, but I did paint that while I was in Puerto Rico, and yeah, that's an anomaly. I've tried to paint on vacations and stuff before, and usually nothing comes of it. But that one painting, and I think part of it is because what I was painting was something that could have, it was a visual moment that could have happened in Maine. You know, it was it looked familiar enough. Aside from like the foliage being slightly different, it was still something that looked very familiar to me. Yeah.
Certainly. This is a really good question from Philip Brow. Congratulations, Jared. Excellent show and talk. I'm wondering if you can talk about your sense of scale. Having seen and admired your work for a while now, I'm always struck by the size and scale of the work. It feels very human.
Thank you, Philip, for saying that. Because the human scale is important to me. I, you know, I for a long time I had a really small studio, so I was sort of limited to making smallish paintings anyway. Now I have a, a much larger studio, but I'm still making paintings that I feel like when I stand in front of, they are like my size. And I don't, I don't, I don't have a very good reason for why I do that, except for it just feels good to me. Like it's big enough that when I'm working on it, it encompasses my, complete view, but it's not so big that I lose myself in one corner of the painting, and then there's this 80% that I can't see anymore. So, yeah, I guess the physical size relationship is what's important to me.
Mhm,
Yeah.
for sure. Deborah also asks, do you think through your palette before you start, or is it developed as you go?
It's really developed as I go. And when I like use the word palette, it's like in a very loose term, because I don't really lay out a traditional palette, with dots of color or anything like that. And this is like something that I've heard you're not supposed to do, but I do a lot of mixing, like right on the painting surface. Because I don't, like, you can mix color on a palette or have two colors next to each other on the palette, but until you get them on the painting and they're next to all the other areas of color, you really don't know what it looks like. So it's easier for me to just mix the color right on the painting, and if it's not right, I just scrape it off and try a different combination.
Absolutely. We're nearing noon, but we have so many great questions coming in, so I'll just try to squeeze in one or two more.
I'll talk faster.
Okay, Greg asks, he has talked a lot about your use of compression, and he says, the compression in your work is poetic to me. Do you read poetry?
I do read poetry. I wouldn't like, don't quiz me on poetry because, but I read poetry. But not, I'm not like I guess I'm not an obsessive poetry reader or anything, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'm into, like right now, the sort of Kenneth Rexroth transcriptions of Chinese and Japanese poetry. But anyway, yeah, good question.
Amazing. And then if you could just wrap up by naming a few more artists maybe that you haven't mentioned yet that you find inspiration from. Someone has brought up Bonnard. Is he, particularly influential to you, or who are the other pillars in your canon?
I mean, I really like Aubrey Leventhal,
Mhm.
contemporary. This guy Craigie Aitchison,
Mhm.
Scottish painter. I don't think he's not alive anymore. He couldn't be. He'd be like 100 and something. I think he's alive. Who else? Roger Reveal, Belgian painter. I'm looking at a lot lately. Alice Neal, of course, like Agnes Martin, which is like not similar to what I'm doing, but I find a real sort of like gentle poetry in her painting.
For sure, and just the sense of sort of serenity and contemplation through form, and there's a real quietness in both of your works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, well, it's noon, so I think we should wrap up, but I just want to say a few more words. A reminder that Jared's exhibition will remain on view through June 23rd in our online viewing room. The show is almost sold out, but we do have a few beautiful paintings left. If you have any inquiries, please feel free to contact me directly. We also have a lovely printed exhibition catalog, which is available through our website shop. And I'm around via email for any more questions. Thank you so much, Hilary and Jared. I thought this was fantastic. I learned a lot from your conversation.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. I'm really sorry about the technical stuff at the beginning, but I think we powered through.
It turned out great. And thank you both very much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hilary.
Thanks, Hilary.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.